Independent journalism to me means freedom. It means having a voice in a time where it's easy to be lost in a bunch of noise. So it's perspective and it's freedom and it's a real sense of control. My name is John Irby, also known as Steve Sweatpants. I am a photojournalist and also the co-owner and director of Street Dreams magazine.
You're listening to Drive, content driven to inspire. Following the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota on the 25th of May, thousands have taken to the streets around the world to fight the racial injustice and police brutality which has brought the end to many innocent lives. Independent journalists have played a vital role in documenting the front lines of the protests. I'm joined by photojournalist Steve John Irby to discuss his role in documenting the Black Lives Matter movement throughout New York City. Hi there, Stephen. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out your day today to come and join us on the podcast. It's really great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You've recently spent a lot of time documenting the Black Lives Matter protests throughout New York City. Would you be able to tell me a little bit about what that's felt like firsthand on the streets?
So, I'm born and raised from New York. I'm 33 years old and born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens. So everything that's been happening in New York is pretty much my whole life. I currently live in Bed-Stuy. So documenting the protests for me is sometimes as close as, just walking 5 minutes down the block from my house. And I could be right in the middle of a protest. Or there's been ones that I've been into in the city, out in Manhattan, running around there. And I've walked, 10 miles a time each day, out there 5 hours a day. It's been some of the most heavy, but also like the most reassuring feeling I've ever felt in my life. I've never seen, people miles and miles on end saying that, with signs that my life matters. So it's been something that's completely incredible. It's definitely a full spectrum, but, something I definitely appreciate being able to be a part of and actually have a voice.
Absolutely. And these protests and marches against terrible injustices, while so universal, felt deeply personal for so many. What's covering these protests felt like to you, and how have you approached that?
For me, it's definitely really personal as well, too. My parents grew up in the 60s and the 70s in New York, and they were protesting back then. It's definitely a full circle experience with me. Everything that my parents and my grandparents have been through, especially my parents being from the deep South and born and raised in New York, and all my blood being basically, slave roots. There's really no other way to put it. So it's, I think it's really crucial to be an artist and be a photographer at this time to be able to project just this different level of emotions that go involved within these past 2 weeks of protesting and my 33 years on being on this earth.
Do you feel like your role as a photographer has changed since the protests began?
For me, not necessarily, because I've always been very adamant as my role as a photographer to, give a real honest look at the Black experience, and also just having a real honest look at my work in general. I've always tried to convey a level of honesty and truth in my work. That's why I like street photography in the first place, because it's candid in those moments that you're not forcing. So nothing at all has changed. If anything, it's just more of like a sense of urgency.
Whereabouts did you initially find that passion for photography?
I guess I found the passion for photography in to begin with in the first place was it's just a weird sense of control and keeping things immortal. I'm scared of shit to die, obviously, probably like as anybody else, but there's a weird thing with photos and art that makes things immortal, and I'm obsessed with that.
And I think, is it now more than ever important for people to be on the ground on the front lines documenting these protests?
I think 100%, because especially, you being out in the UK and me being in the States right now, we're living in a very crazy time, and within our governments and our worlds of a lot of lying. So it's up to people in our age group and our demographic to actually be there to see what's happening and experience it for yourself, rather than fall into these Twitter loops or whatever you can find. Wherever you get your information from social media, it's not most likely as vetted out as it should be, unless you can actually have the experience for yourself. So if you're young and you're not sick, you should be outside.
So the attacks on foreign press have been seen by many as an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of press. Can independent journalism and frontline photography be the people's response to that?
I feel like the kind of the cadence that's happening along with like this independent journalism is very similar to how, like, just pretty much like when blogs and podcasts really first start popping up and everybody having the access to have a platform, and it's no different now. This is the day and age where we all have the access to have a platform to tell our truths and tell our perspectives, and it is a very dangerous world because you have other people that can definitely be on, for lack of a better term, racist. And then you don't want to hear racist rhetorics. But for the most part, if you are having, cohesive, conductive, productive conversations and like in art and in news, that stuff, especially from the independent source where it's way more personable, it holds greater weight, I feel like, because this is the day and age where we're trying to get more connected in a world where everybody's trying to lie to you.
Absolutely. I think if everyone has access to imagery and stories from the protests instantly through social media, is it then harder for the government to silence those?
The more pressure and unification that you could put on the front of where there's information that is coming out from all these individual sources, it's just going to inevitably put more pressure, and decisions will have to be made because there's too many voices that are, that are recording the videos of cops beating people up, or recording just any kind of injustice and social injustice that's happening on all fronts, of racist fronts, classist fronts, and all the different things that's been going on in the world in general. So this, having a camera phone or just documenting or finding in other ways just to interpret what's happening is the most powerful tool that we have that nobody else can really deny.
Social media remains largely unregulated. How can people stay alert on social media and make sure that the information they receive is well-intentioned?
I look at social media like a new age first impression. If anything that you put up online without me even knowing you, you can immediately have an immediate assumption about what you're about or what you're into. So as long as you are completely conscious and self-aware about the things that you're putting out onto the internet, whether you're for the cause or whether you're trying to communicate something very specific, you just need to be very aware of what you're putting out there. Because that shit is set in stone. Like, people think you could just delete a post. Like, that doesn't always count anymore. So you just have to be you have to be very conscious and aware of what you're putting out there in the world.
As consumers and readers of the information coming from the front lines, what is our responsibility and how can we best elevate the voices that need to be heard the most?
By being more supportive of those voices in the first place. In the digital space, we live in a world where everything is literally at the touch of your fingers. And then some people don't even do that. So if you know that you have a platform, or you have or great information that's actually something that's helpful and useful, just hit the share button, or just send it to a friend. It literally takes 0.5 seconds. I got a chance to go to Cuba a couple of times for work trips and been able to go out there just for fun. And one of the things that I really started to understand and appreciate about Cuba was how much things they could do with time in their day. Like, they literally become a taxi driver, fix a car, and be a biochemist all in a day. And I can't send an email. Was like, come on, you got to be kidding me. So just being very aware of it doesn't really take that much effort is a huge part of how you can actually help share the message.
Who's been your biggest inspiration throughout the protests?
One of my biggest inspirations right now is one of the photographers have been documenting a lot of work. His name is Mel D. Cole. He's like one of my big brothers, I feel like. I got to recently become acquainted with him and cool with him because we were in a gallery together earlier this year before like the pandemic really ravaged everything back in February. That feels like 6 years ago now, honestly. But he has been a hip hop photographer extraordinaire, street photographer extraordinaire, and he's been really on the front lines documenting the protests pretty much every single day, from all levels of it. He's been involved, with the marches, like being involved with the cops and getting out of those situations, being there for literally everything. So I think it's really dope to see somebody like him being a Black man, being on the front lines, and still being able to have like these stories that are going to last, it's going to stand the test of time, because these photos that he's capturing and documenting and experiencing is only the first layer of how deep it is going to be, because we still haven't even downloaded all this information yet.
Absolutely. For anyone listening with a camera who wants to get involved and document what's happening around the world, what would you advise?
I think one of the biggest things, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give to people that are going to go out to document is first, be very self-aware of how you feel. If you have some kind of anger, or if you feel some kind of somberness, if you feel like some kind of unity, and then figure out ways how you can actually project that into your work. You know, if you're feeling angry, you should find ways to communicate that. If you're feeling sad, you should find ways to communicate that. And at the same time, while you're understanding like your moral complexity of the situation, you should always understand to don't gravitate towards exploitative situations as much, unless it's something that's literally something that you want to document and to project onto your feelings. I think that it's really important to just be honest and truthful with the work as possible, and not go for like the quote unquote clickbait situations. You know, I think it's really important to understand what your purpose is there, and also what you feel inside and what your purpose is to communicate.
I think independent journalists can tend to be a little bit more vulnerable in that sense of safety, as opposed to journalists who've got a team behind them who can help them when they get arrested, for example. So what kind of safety considerations do you take before going out to document the protests?
The safety situations or just kind of protocols I like to go through is I don't like to agitate no situation. I already know that I'm like a 6 foot black dude walking around with a camera. I don't need to start any more shit than I need to, unless somebody's actually coming at me. So I like to say all the time, respect is free. And I just try to also remind people, like, this is a very special time where we're going through that. We're still literally in the middle of a pandemic. So you need to make sure that we're taking the proper health precautions, and you have the right gear on as well too, because it all equates into like the end goal of just being safe.
Have you felt threatened when you're out there at all, at any point?
No. I've definitely been in situations where I've probably been too close to the police, and you have somebody trying to push up a bicycle against you or something like that. But I've been pretty lucky to be nobody really been fucking with me, because I try to be respectful as much as I can, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I truly try to be respectful first, unless the situation deems me to be all Brooklyn on somebody.
So going forward, what do you see your role as being in the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think it's important for my role to have something that's short term and long term. I feel that, in the short term, it's really important for us to, for myself to I've been doing a lot of print sales. So I've been working with Merch Aid to do a print sale for making T-shirts and having the prints go towards one of the movements and causes to help, get people out of jail. I'm working with this brand called Change to have another kind of print sale. So all the proceeds that are going towards the NCAAP legal aid. I'm probably getting the funds mixed up, but
that's incredible.
There's a lot of different, and then we're launching another print sale on this Wednesday with myself, New York Nico, Dark Room, and Christelle Studios. That's going to be going towards the Black Lives Matters and LGBTQ movements. So that's the short-term goal, is finding all these actionable things that we can do. Finding different ways that, besides just photography, I dropped the thing called Street Dreams Radio, where we have different kind of radio programs where we're working with a bunch of different DJs and artists. We definitely have even finding ways to have the music have the influence, and I put I've marched in the protests, and I have samples from the protests and marching into the mixes and stuff like that, so people can feel like what it feels like to be marching through New York. And in the long term, I feel like I'm developing some things. Hopefully it goes through, but some curriculums and all these things that actually affect my community and my neighborhood, because at the end of the day, I want to see where the money is going. And I think it's important to know that the neighborhoods that I'm working in and I'm living in and being a part of is the things that I'm actually trying to be 10 times more impactful on. So having those short-term goals and the short-term and the long-term goals is just really the most actionable thing that I can see how I'm going to continue to be supporting the stuff that I've been doing for the last 6-7 years with Street Dreams already.
That's really inspiring. Have you got hope for the future of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I don't think that racism is going to end like in the next 30 years, but I think it's really important for, having a proper education process that, goes down the line so that somebody can, somebody else like our kids or grandkids and, everything that's in the future, that they can pick up the slack and have a real strong point of reference where they're not just referring to a lot of the fake news and false narratives that are floating out there. Like, we actually have the power to determine what's going to happen education-wise and art-wise. So I invest in that side of the argument 100%, because I know that, racism is not going to stop tomorrow, as much as I wanted to, as much as probably all of us wanted to. But we all have to be aware of that and do the work and understand that if you do the work, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. How do we keep the momentum going once the news cycle refreshes?
By keeping the movement going is not making it like a periodical kind of thing, is the constant conversation that revolves around race, it revolves around religion, it revolves around just this greater idea of, being more open as a human society in the first place. And race is 100% the component right now. And I also feel like this is a chain reaction of all the other human life matters that are going into place in the first place. So the best way to keep the movement going is being aware that there are other movements that coincide with this one, because it's all about injustice, period. So if you care about black lives, I'm not saying that, you should be caring about anybody getting murdered and or any kind of social injustice. The same thing goes with black trans lives. The same thing goes with, gay rights. The same thing goes with, just every Islamophobia. It literally goes with everything, it all coincides. So I just think, not taking one movement and making it a singular thing I think that's dangerous, because in the long run, not to say that people will burn out, but you need to understand that there is a greater goal that we need to all achieve. And at the same time, we need to make sure that those other goals support the main one as well, too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Are there any useful resources that we can share that allow people access to information directly from those involved in the protests?
There's definitely a bevy of resources to research and look into. I think one of the people that I follow in New York is this activist group called Warriors in the Garden. Warriors in the Garden is a youth-led activist group that does an incredible job, and they are super informative about what's going on, about what's going on locally in New York, and it trickles into what's going on in the world as well too. But yeah, a lot of the photographers and a lot of the publications out in New York are being very adamant with the coverage and understanding the angles to be taken and showing like what's actually happening in the ground. So I think, is you can start locally and then also, expand to see like which publications, like I was saying, like the New Yorker, are giving like some of these real testimonials and these real stories that are happening on the ground.
That's great. Well, thanks ever so much, Stephen, for coming on the podcast. It's been fantastic to get your insights and perspective on what's happening right now and independent journalism on the whole. And just keep doing what you're doing. It's really inspiring to see.
I try. I try not to fuck up.
Thanks a lot.
Nice talking to you, man. Take it easy, man. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. You can follow Steve on Instagram at Steve Sweatpants. You can find links to support the movement in the YouTube description below. If you'd also like to support the podcast so that we can continue to tell inspiring stories such as this, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/drivedocs. I want to say a big thank you to John Rowbotham for producing this episode. My name is Chris Healey and I've been your host. See you in the next episode.